The Brutalist follows Laszlo Toth, a Jewish Hungarian architect immigrating to America in 1947 to escape the trauma of World War II. He was separated from his wife and niece during this time and is waiting for them to join him in America. Shortly after he arrives, he meets the Van Buren family and their patriarch Harrison, who hires Laszlo to build him a grand community center that will take years to build and finish. During Laszlo's time with the Van Buren family, he discovers the true depravity of the ultra-wealthy and the general disdain for immigrants in America. The movie chronicles several years of the Toth's family's lives and their struggle to reach the American dream. I've been back and forth on whether to review this movie. I saw it in IMAX around a month ago, and I can easily say this is a good movie. I do think with the amount of buzz around it and the lack of availability it had until the end of January had my expectations pretty high. But one of the biggest things about this movie is that it is over 3.5 hours long with a 15-minute intermission included. While I think the length works somewhat to its advantage in the way that it's telling its story, I do also think it has shut out a lot of the average filmgoers. So I have really only seen a lot of praise for this movie, and of course the inevitable online film circle backlash for this movie. If you didn't know, the movie has seen some backlash in the last month for its use of artificial intelligence. It uses the Respeecher program to fix minimal inflections in Adrien Brody and Felicity Jones's Hungarian accents when they're speaking Hungarian. While this honestly doesn't bother me that much, and we've seen this used before, one of the bigger examples is James Earl Jones's voice as Darth Vader in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. What does bother me is the apparent use of generative AI for a montage of images towards the end of the movie. While I will admit it wasn't noticeable while I was watching the movie, I am adamantly against any use of generative AI in movies, regardless of how small your budget is. I think it's lazy and soulless, and it does ultimately hurt this movie's overall reputation in my eyes. But now to get back to the actual review. The movie stars Adrien Brody as Laszlo and Felicity Jones as his wife, Elizabeth. The film is distinctly structured around its first and second half. Laszlo is trying to scrape together any money or opportunity he has to help his family move to him. So while Elizabeth isn't on screen until the second half of the movie, her presence or absence for Laszlo is felt in the first half. He is recruited to renovate Harrison Van Buren's, played by Guy Pearce's, library as a birthday surprise from his son, Harry, played by Joe Alwyn. After coming to love the work Laszlo did, Harrison tracks him down and proposes the idea of building him an enormous community center. This feeds Laszlo's desire to be an architect again, and he and Harrison become friends. But as the story progresses, you see cracks begin to form as Harrison's impatience and believed self-importance comes to the surface. I think Brady Corbet did a really good job with the writing and directing here. One of the biggest standouts for the movie is the cinematography. This is a gorgeously shot movie, and I hope to see more work from cinematographer Lowell Crowley. He and Corbett try to emulate the look of older movies. Specifically, it has a lot of the same look and vibes as the 70s era's movies, most akin to Francis Ford Coppola's. They also utilize an older technique with shooting it in VistaVision on 35mm film, so it's very, very high resolution, and it looks really, really great. The score is also great. There are a few pieces sprinkled throughout that are fantastic. I do wish the motifs were used more often than they were, and that the score didn't take a back seat as often as it did, but when it is used well, it is exceptional. One of the best scenes of the movie is the opening scene. Laszlo and hundreds of other people are in a boat on their way to New York. When they get closer to the shoreline of New York City, everyone rushes to the deck to see their new lives. Narration from Felicity Jones reading a letter that she sent to Laszlo, combined with the growing score and a handheld camera that's just as lost in the crowded shuffle as everybody else, all builds to this crescendo of this moment where we see the Statue of Liberty. It really captures that feeling, and the way it's shot works so well that it's used for most of the movie's promotional material, because that moment does give me chills. There are a couple moments just visually throughout this movie that are very evocative like that. However, as I have had plenty of time to sit with it, I do think the second half of the movie is much weaker than its first. I've come to dislike that part of the movie more the further away I get from my first watch. While there are some beautiful scenes, like the one in Italy when they're looking for the correct marble, Corbett shifts the focus from just being a struggle to find your art and meaning in a new life to just beating the audience over the head with awful things happening to Laszlo and his family. There is a very shocking moment in the second half of the movie that kind of lost me after it happens. It takes the theme of the movie and shoves it in your face, losing all subtlety and subtext in the metaphor it was already making obvious by making it literal. The movie is rightfully critical of the rich and ultra wealthy. Harrison is not a good person by any stretch of the imagination, and the catharsis that is attempted to be delivered in the third act falls fairly flat for me because it chooses to take away some autonomy from one of the main characters in that moment. Essentially, I didn't believe the second act was as well balanced as the first. You understand Laszlo's struggles and how hard it is for him to get ahead, but there's also a focus on his art and how he expresses himself. And I think the movie would have worked better if it kept the expression of his emotions and his need to build the structure for Harrison. I think it loses focus on that, and where the story goes may have some truth to it. I'm sure that this happened to hundreds, if not thousands, of immigrants and just the way they were treated, but it didn't feel genuine in its harshness towards the characters. While it never gets to the point where it feels like it's a form of torture or misery porn, similar to some movies like Capernaum or The Painted Bird, it's not nearly as well balanced in its approach as, say, something like Schindler's List. One of the main talking points of this movie has been the acting, and deservedly so. Adrien Brody does a phenomenal job. I think he's the best part of this movie, and his willingness to appear vulnerable in this role makes the movie work. You might not always like Laszlo, but you understand him and the emotions he works throughout the movie. I think Felicity Jones also does a good job, but the other big standout to me is Guy Pearce as Harrison. I think this is one of his best performances. The subtlety in the way that he treats Laszlo and how that changes from admiration to disdain in the same moments is impressive. It's a very underhanded and evil role. And immediately after I watched it, I said to my friend that I saw the movie with that he comes off as a more sociable Daniel Plainview from There Will Be Blood. And I think that kind of communicates what kind of role this is. I think Corbet is a solid director, but I do think the film is a little overbloated in its runtime. While my next point is admittedly nitpicky, I did still want to bring it up. The movie has marketed itself and presents itself as being somewhat of a true story. While it never outright says that, it also coasts, I think, on the hope that people don't look into it. It is an original story. I'm glad that an original story got the attention it did, but it feels like a movie that should be telling a real person's story, but didn't find the people who inspired it interesting enough, so it took aspects from different immigrants' lives and put it here for a more entertaining movie. While my feelings and how this kind of story is approached aren't fair to criticize the movie on ultimately, but I did walk away with a feeling of dishonesty in its representation. I believe that if you're trying to bring awareness to the treatment of Jewish Hungarian immigrants during this time period, that you shouldn't make up stories about them to do so, but that is neither here nor there. There, of course, are other movies from this year even, like Nickel Boys, which is a fictional story about real-life events, but I think that had a much more respectful approach to the subject matter. Overall, I do think this is a good movie, and the strongest points are the acting and the cinematography. The writing and the story is solid, but I do think the decisions the movie made in the last hour especially did take it down a somewhat predictably miserable route and doesn't stick the landing. I didn't agree with a handful of decisions they were making. So I will be rating The Brutalist a B-. I am reviewing this movie because of the upcoming Oscars on Sunday. At the moment, as far as the frontrunners for Best Picture goes, I do think this is one of the weaker ones. While it wouldn't bother me for Adrien Brody to win Best Actor, because I do think he's really good in this role. What do you guys think? What is your favorite pick for Best Picture coming up? What did you think of The Brutalist? Let me know, and I will be back with another video.